So today I had an interesting conversation with John. He has a science background. He contacted me following my discussion with Aaron Ra on YouTube and wanted to talk about some points that came up in my discussion with Aaron Ra. With Aaron Ra, I talked about epistemology and how it relates to science and faith, how the same epistemology which proves science can also be used to prove faith. Aaron Ra got annoyed and didn't want to have that conversation, but me and John had an interesting discussion on the subject. Here it is. I'm Arjuna. I live in New Zealand and work as an electrician. And I am a Hare Krishna and an avid hobby philosopher. So I'm very fortunate that my job allows me to listen to audio content at work. So I devour apologetics, debates, and a lot of lectures on Hare Krishna theology, as well as social issues. And that gives me lots to think about. And I've recently started my YouTube channel, Theology Unleashed, where I defend theism and Christian consciousness.
My money in IT, doing development and business analysis. I've always been a little bit disinterested in philosophy. I think that most people who come from a physics background tend to have a relatively low opinion of data. So to somebody like me, philosophy is for people who are too impatient. Sorry, for somebody like me, philosophy is for people who are too impatient to wait for the data. I am thinking of starting a new YouTube channel, which is going to be called Observable Horizon. I do a lot of online debates with people who hold very strange views on science. And like, obviously, this is not you, Arjun, but for example, I talk to flat earthers a lot. And I have, I think, a lot of patience, which allows me to listen to them and try to understand where they're coming from. But anyway, that's, yeah, exactly. I'm not that interested in insults. Anyway, so the main reason for telling you that is to explain the name. Observable Horizon is like a physics pun. It's because there is this thing called the observable horizon, which is the furthest point we can theoretically see if we have a large enough telescope to see it. But it's also a kind of joke to say there is a horizon and we can observe it. And that's one of the ways that we know the world is round. But anyway, so the reason I messaged you in the first place, and we set up this discussion, was that I watched your discussion with Aaron Ra, and there was a point in that discussion where you wanted to talk about the fact that from a scientific point of view, there are things that we theoretically have faith in that are the same sort of things. They fall into the same classification as things that you might have faith in as a religious person. And Aaron shut you down very rapidly because he's had that discussion a million times before, and he just moved along. And I've had this discussion in my head a lot, but I've never who wants to have. So I thought this would be an opportunity for me to express what's in my head, and it's complicated. So I think like we're going to be lucky if we finish this discussion within the time available.
Yeah,
we could always talk about something else.
That's a good topic.
So let's.
That's something I've carried on to the comments from videos following that discussion with Aaron Ra himself, some other skeptics. So I was listening to a debate inspiring philosophy skeptics today about the problem of evil, and Alex O'Connor, a skeptic, comments how he looks for internal consistency in the world. That's a lot of what he's doing. Channel religion. And so what he was talking about is if we want to claim that the suffering is justified, then we have to be able to demonstrate it. So my question for him is, does he believe things which he cannot justify? So does he believe that other people are conscious? And if so, can he justify?
Right. Okay. So I kind of slightly prefer to start with the question, does the universe that I perceive with my senses exist or not?
I mean, there's many different fact features.
There's a whole bunch. Yeah.
So, do the things we perceive with our senses actually correspond to reality, like the brain backdrop? And this very much relates to the epistemic regress problem philosophy.
So, I would say, okay, it's not just that it doesn't matter. It's a boring, unimportant, and irrelevant question. And it's sort of,
if that's a satisfactory answer, kind of the same answer.
No, wait. By itself, it's an unsatisfactory answer. I completely accept that. So I have a long way to go to expand on it. But what I'd like to start off with is mathematics. So, if we start with a fantastic achievement in mathematics in the 1990s, I should know his name. He's an English professor of mathematics. His first name is Andrew. His second name begins with W, and it's like Wilkes or something like that. I should know. Anyway, this gentleman proved Fermat's last theorem, and he did it by unifying two entirely separate branches of mathematics. And the unification required years worth of work and enormous amounts of the paper that he published was well over 100 pages long. Somebody found a problem with it, and they had to publish a correction to that problem, which took another 40 pages. So we now know that Fermat's last theorem is correct.
I don't know.
It's okay. It doesn't really matter. It's not important. But somebody had speculated that these two branches of mathematics could be unified about a decade earlier. Enormous amounts of mathematical papers have been published where somebody was saying, I can prove X if these two branches of mathematics can be unified. So there's like my first point is that knowledge can be conditional. You can say, I know this if this is true. And it doesn't mean that you don't know something. You have improved human knowledge by publishing a mathematical paper that makes a proof like that. And if Wilkes, or whatever his name was, Andrew, I'm so sorry, I can't remember your surname. If somebody, I'm dyslexic actually. That's part of the reason I have trouble memorizing names. So if he'd come along and proved the converse, that that these two branches of Fermat's theorem was wrong, it wouldn't mean that those papers that have been published before didn't represent knowledge. They would still have been knowledge. There's still knowledge that X is true if Y is true. And if Y is not true, it doesn't mean that you haven't contributed knowledge. Right. And you can go back much, much further in mathematics. Because in the 1900s, Bertrand Russell launched an attempt to prove the axioms of mathematics, and they failed. So I'm going to screw this up completely. But as I understand it, they are things like 0 plus 1 equals 1. All of mathematics is theoretically dependent on these axioms. But if you ask mathematicians, does that mean you don't know anything? Because you can't prove anything for certain. They'll say, well, at least most of them, I think, will say no. It's these axioms are not they're not necessary assumptions. They are just the base rule for the area of knowledge that we work in. In the same way that knights move 2 squares forward and 1 square left or right is an axiom of the rule of the rules of chess are axiomatic to the game of chess. If you have to solve a chess puzzle and you say, I can make mate in 5, and somebody else says, well, I can make mate in 1 if I assume that the knight can move the same way that the queen does, then they've broken the axiomatic rules of chess. And they're not playing chess anymore. They're playing a different game. So in the same way, if you do mathematics using 0 plus 1 equals 2, then you're not doing mathematics, you're doing something else. Am I making sense so far?
Yeah. I mean, so you can have something that's internally consistent.
So in the same way, the existence of the universe is axiomatic to physics. And I'm not interested in the existence of the universe. It actually doesn't matter.
Isn't all you have pragmatism, which is, just a practical thing that it seems to be that these actions to go towards these results.
The knowledge is still knowledge. So at this point, I'm gonna move to this. I'm sorry about this. This is like I like this example a lot, but it's pretty horrible for somebody who doesn't do physics. I'm going to move to the second slide. Okay. All right. None of this has to necessarily make any sense. But you see like if we start at the top, you have Einstein's field equations. They don't make sense to me. Like I have studied the field equations, and they did make at one point a period of about a month. They made sense to me, and I could at that point in time have shown you how to get from them to the Schwarzschild solution, which is the second one down. But in the same way that the proof of Fermat's last theorem was a beautiful thing in mathematics, this is one of the most beautiful things in physics. Einstein worked for 6 years to come up with the field equations. They were published in 1915 in the middle of like humans doing stupid things. And yeah, because it was World War One, he could only reveal his results to the Prussian Academy of something or other. I can't remember. Anyway, it would be in German. So German scientists got a head start. That's sort of it adds color to the story. It's not really that relevant. There was a brilliant German physicist called Schwarzschild. His name means black shield. The problem with Einstein's field equations is they describe gravity beautifully, but they can't just take the field equations and work something out. So you need a simplification, and to get to a simplification, you need to start thinking about about particular situations in the universe. And a situation in the universe that occurs a lot is a spherically symmetrical gravitational field. So planets orbit in the spherically symmetrical gravitational field of the sun. So you can reduce this horrible thing in green that's like it's shorter than the Schwarzschild metric, which is the second line, but it's written in mathematical shorthand, and if you wrote the whole thing out in differential equations, it would go on forever. So it's much harder to solve than the one on the second line. So Schwarzschild's genius was that he thought about spherically symmetrical gravitational fields, and he thought if there was an exact differential version of Einstein's field equations that operated in a spherically symmetrical gravitational field, it would have to have certain qualities. And he plugged those qualities in, and he gave them unknowns as variables. And then he worked out each of the unknowns, and that gave him this metric. And the difference between that metric and Newton's gravitational equations allows you to calculate that the closest approach of Mercury to the sun shifts around its orbit by 43 arc seconds per century, which is equivalent to 1 degree every 8,400 years. And that's been measured, and the agreement between this theory and the measurement is good. It's actually weirdly not perfect, but the imperfection is I deliberately included it because the agreement is not perfect, and I thought that might give us a chance to discuss.
Perhaps that's just a complicated form of, if I eat ice cream all day long, I feel sick, and if I eat healthy, balanced meals, I feel energetic. Like, I don't know if it's true that ice cream exists and that vegetables exist because of the brain and the vat problem, but it seems to be that I get good results by eating this diet and not that diet. So in a similar way, these field equations correlate to reality with a high degree of accuracy. We don't know if any of this is true, but it gives us results. It's consistent.
Yes, I'm trying to go like a fraction further than that and say they agree with the universe. Whether the universe exists or not is irrelevant to the fact that they agree. So the prediction, they have predictive power, and it's the predictive power that's important. So within the science of physics, which doesn't care whether the universe exists or not, they represent knowledge. I mean, if you go out and you look for Mercury, you know where to find it. If Mercury doesn't exist, that's less important than the fact that we know where to find it.
But suppose you had some kid who was an expert on all the Marvel comics and they knew everything about every Marvel story. They've got knowledge about a cartoon world. So you can call that knowledge, right? So if we have the brain and the vat problem, we could just have knowledge of an illusion.
Yes.
And it could be like a video game. We wake up from it one day and we're like, oh, that was a bad dream. Now I'm back in reality.
Yeah. I mean, have you seen the Matrix films?
Yeah.
Right. So there's this point in the Matrix film where the traitor is eating a steak and he's enjoying a steak, and he says he wants to be plugged back into the Matrix. He wants to forget about all of the shitty reality that you have, because he knows that there's no difference between eating the fake steak and eating a real steak. The Matrix is as good as reality would be if he had a good life. I want a good life, plug me back into the Matrix. But this is not the same. It's because he knows that the Matrix is fake. We don't know that the Matrix is
Cut out again.
We find ourselves in a situation where there is no evidence that I could present that would convince somebody who believes that the Matrix is real, that would change their mind. If somebody believes that we live in a Matrix, they will come up with excuse after excuse after excuse to shoot down whatever it is that I want to present to them. So, I mean, I could give reasons for believing that reality is real.
I still think this comes back to that whole, it may not be true, but assuming it's true works. So let's go with that.
It's not just that it works. It's not just that we don't have any choice. It's that because we can make predictions within the physics that works on those axioms,
but that's what
there isn't any
internally consistent. Like, Like in a video game, the physics engine in the video game can function consistently, and you figure out, when to jump and all the different things, and how the physics engine, how to interact with the physics engine in such a way to be very dexterous. And we can have a similar kind of knowledge of the material world,
and there's no.
It could still just be like a video game.
There's no point in trying to play the video game, assuming a different kind of physics to the one that runs in the video game.
But if there's a reality outside the video game, then like supposing the video game were all there were, there'd be certain goals which would be wise to go after. But if the video game is actually just an intermediary to some other reality, then there may be other goals that are more worthwhile to pursue, because there's an eternal reality that can be achieved if you follow certain virtues, say. Right.
Okay. So again, using the Matrix as the films as an analogy, the very, very beginning of the first film, Neo believes that there is something else, and he gets a message that says, "Follow the white rabbit," and he leaves, discovers that there is something else. I haven't had my girl with a white rabbit moment, so I don't know that there is anything else.
But lots of
until there is
had experiences which they attribute to a deeper understanding of reality than what science is able to plug into.
Okay, well that's religion. It's like we're not there. We're still discussing whether or not the universe agrees with our senses. I'll grant you that.
You've frozen. You've lost you there for a second.
It's a marginally more interesting discussion than the discussion of whether or not the universe conforms to our senses. So, okay, I wanted to play a thought experiment game with you. So let's say we meet somebody who's come from the future, and this person can absolutely prove to us that he's returned from the future. How he can prove it is relatively irrelevant, but let's say he can take us around in his time machine, and he can prove to us that he can move to different time zones and whatever. So we're both convinced that this guy comes from the future. And he tells us that in his time, they have an absolute trustable answer for every question that we have in our time. They know the answer to anything that we could care to ask. So he says, what would you like to know? So my first question for him isn't going to be, does the universe exist? Because to me, that's really boring. I don't want to know that.
Well, it's not really conceivable how somebody in the future would have access to that knowledge any more than we do now, because...
No, I know, but this is a thought experiment, so let's pretend that he does.
Okay. So where are you going with? Was that the point?
Yeah, the point is, supposing we could get answers to anything.
Yeah, but if like,
also deliberately picked somebody coming from the future as.
I mean, what about somebody coming from the spiritual world? I mean, obviously you.
I picked somebody coming from the future so that we could discuss it without having to worry about whether or not there's something spiritual.
Right. I mean, perhaps in the future people are more spiritually advanced and they've tapped into knowledge of
exactly.
the spiritual world.
That could be how he knows.
At the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's a discussion of questions. A lot of the Vedic literature is questions between sages and qualified people who are inquiring. And some of the questions are, what's the ultimate goal of life and things like that. So that might be a pertinent question,
Yeah.
What's the highest goal to achieve in this human form of life?
Right. So I would be more interested in knowing, like there are practical questions to which, like, humanity desperately needs an answer. If somebody has come back from the future, probably we came up with a solution to climate change. It would be nice to know what that solution is. There's also, to me, one of the most urgent questions after climate change is something called the Fermi Paradox. I would really like to know what the solution to the Fermi Paradox is, because I think it could mean the difference between civilization existing and not existing 1,000 years from now.
Paradox?
The Fermi Paradox is the fact that there are enormous numbers of chances for life to exist in the universe, but apparently, if you discount stories from people in the backwoods who say that they've been kidnapped, apparently nobody's come to visit us yet. Not only has nobody come to visit us, but when we look at stars in our neighborhood, we see no evidence of life. And we should. I mean, it's really worrying that we don't, because it means one of two things. Well, okay, this is the simple version.
They don't want to come and visit the redneck belt known as Earth.
No, the problem is every single solution that people have thought of for the Fermi Paradox doesn't work.
I mean, what if we're just a bunch of rednecks and they have nothing to do with us because we're too busy fighting with each other and cursing and have no culture or sophistication?
The reason that doesn't work is that even if they didn't come to visit us, we would still know that they were there, because any sufficiently advanced civilization would alter its environment to the extent that stars would start to disappear. So we should see stars.
Why would stars disappear?
I just think, well, a simple way would be something like a Dyson sphere, which is where you surround a star with material in order to gather its energy.
But what if they're so advanced that they don't trash their environment?
That's not trashing your environment. It's
what if they can
actually
tap into energy through, like, magnetic resonance, like what sort of stuff that people hypothesize Tesla was onto?
Sorry,
I mean,
Tesla's.
Like, I'm not claiming Tesla had free energy, but we can't rule it out.
Yes, we can. Yeah, sorry, but that's another discussion. Tesla was a brilliant guy, but he was a little crazy.
Well, definitely. I mean, the people that think Tesla had a solution to everything did not consider what the ramifications of wireless microwave transmission of electricity would be on cancer rates. It's a pretty utopian idea to think Tesla's technology would have done the world so much good. You can be romantic about ideas that haven't been tried. Once something's been tried, then you find out that it's got downsides. Yeah. Anyway,
I mean, pretty much everything has downsides. There's like, yeah. Anyway, so But I mean, the problem with Fermat's with the Fermi paradox is that one possible solution to it is that every sufficiently advanced civilization destroys itself before it starts to spread out around the universe.
What if they just are self-satisfied and are happy with simple village life? Don't need all this advanced technology.
Well, right. The problem with that is that there are so many stars and so many planets in the universe. There's the current estimate is 7 followed by 23.
I mean, if there were other,
and that's stars, that's not planets. That's fire.
Supposing there was a nearby planet similar to ours, would they have a way of detecting our existence?
Not yet. Well, I mean, if they're close enough, kind of they might have picked up
hypothesis?
Radio waves. But no, because we've only just started. It's like our civilization has just sparked on, and
but why would they necessarily be more advanced than us? I mean, I don't know. I've really wondered what the math is for saying it's likely for life to come about, because I've not seen numbers that actually corresponded to reality, which indicated life was quite likely to happen. Even if it did happen,
okay,
it would be
they would not necessarily in my view be further
along than us.
That would be great. I would be very happy with that solution. If that was the solution, then we can stop worrying about the fact that we're on the edge of destroying ourselves.
Maybe we can talk about that next time, and you can send me the numbers and I can try to figure out how they decided that life was probable.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that the nice, cheerful solutions to the Fermi paradox are not true. I'm just saying that we have to worry about the horrible ones. Anyway, so questions like that would be the first set of questions that I might ask. The next set would be.
So how does that tie into the epistemology we're talking about regarding knowing if science corresponds?
I was just saying, it's in terms of like the way somebody like me thinks. These are the questions that need to be answered. And it would be a very, very long time before I got down to asking this gentleman whether or not the universe exists, because there's nothing I can do with that information. It doesn't change anything. Like the answer to
well, maybe you might ask them, how to become happy. To live a good life and achieve a real kind of bliss.
I'm already happy.
Right.
I've often described myself as quite possibly the happiest person in the world. I think I might be number 28. But,
that makes you sound like the happiest guy in the world is supposedly that Buddhist man. Okay. I don't know if you've heard about him.
I'm
like every time they do a study of how to figure out which country has the happiest people, it always turns out to be some like third world country. When they do studies to figure out what makes people healthier and live longer, it's like things like relationships.
Right.
And so,
but I've seen studies that say that Denmark is the happiest place in the world, or like if not one of the Scandinavian countries, then
but what they find in the psychological research is that beyond a certain level, like basically once you're getting your needs met and you're no longer in poverty and you've got a roof over your head and you don't have to worry about your next meal or how you're going to buy clothes and so on, when you've got your basic needs met, then more wealth doesn't make you happier, or technology. So, like, the more technology advances, it doesn't actually produce more happiness, because like, there's thing that like all sorts of things can prevent you from being happy. Like any part of your body can be in pain.
and all sorts of things can take away from your happiness. But once you've got nothing that's taking away from your happiness, once you've got your basic needs being met, then happiness doesn't come from material things. It comes from relationships and a sense of purpose and meaning. So why would an advanced civilization necessarily be, having so much technology that they've got to surround their sun with solar panels? Maybe they'd just be having their technology advanced enough to meet their needs, and then spending their energy on a sense of meaning and relationships and all those sort of interpersonal things that nourish our being on a deeper level.
No, I mean, that is possible, but the Fermi Paradox is still the Fermi Paradox, because if there are millions and millions and millions of civilizations out there, the chances that all of them take that route are very low. And the problem is the numbers are so huge that it doesn't matter how you drill down into them, you are still going to end up with a whole bunch of civilizations. And it only takes one per galaxy to...
Well, we can have another discussion and talk about the probabilities of life coming about, because that's a whole another topic. So you were just kind of making this as the point of what you would ask somebody who was coming from the future.
What I would ask, So
you probably didn't mean us to go off on it as a tangent.
No, I kind of did. I thought this would be a useful question, because it's like, so the next set of questions that I would ask would be questions, hard physics questions that we don't currently know the answer to. One of the obvious ones. Why is the universe made of matter? Why is the universe that we observe made almost entirely of matter? We have ideas, but not me personally. It's not we. It's okay. They, cosmologists, have ideas that might explain why the universe is not 50% matter and 50% antimatter. But there is very little data at the moment to back up those ideas. If I had an answer that could be pursued and demonstrated with data, then I would win a Nobel Prize. I wouldn't deserve the Nobel Prize because I didn't get it by my own hard work. I got it by asking somebody who come from the future. But at least I would have the fun of knowing something spectacular that other people don't know.
Assuming that the future is progressive rather than regressive, that we haven't had some kind of world war or slipped into just authoritarian government that turned into a dystopia and rendered the world into poverty through Marxism or some other horrible ideology.
Yes, I am. But I mean, it's a thought experiment, so I'm allowed to. Yeah. I mean, the point of the thought experiment is to say, like, this is where we differ. We differ on the kinds of questions that are interesting.
Come at that from another angle. So, like, let's go back to your Matrix example of the guy who wanted to go back into the Matrix because, well, ignorance is bliss. That's the basic idea that was being presented there. That in the Matrix film, the people that had left the Matrix weren't any happier than the people that were in a loop. It's actually stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam that there's two kinds of happy people. There's the fool and the person who's transcendentally realized. That's attain the spiritual platform, and then there's the people in the between who figured out that they're in some kind of illusion and they're lacking in spiritual realization and they're trying to get spiritually realized, and those people are in anxiety. So that you could say on like just assuming for now I'll do a thought experiment. Let's assume kind of like Pascal's wager that there is an afterlife that is far better than anything that could be attained in the material world. And just like in a video game, like recently video games have become a spectator sport, and they've become a competitive spectator sport where people can actually win money. So you're doing something in an imaginary reality. It doesn't actually exist, but it has the actions taken in the video game can have real world consequences. So in a similar way, some theologies describe this material world as a place, term for some people use called teleological phenomenology. Basically means material world is designed to give experiences to our senses, rather than that the matter it's composed of being the foundation of reality. It's got a purpose behind it. So we can, if there's something, when we leave our body, when we die, we actually go somewhere else, and our actions here dictate where we go, then it's worth knowing about.
And as soon as it is demonstratable, then it becomes interesting.
Well, it would come down to virtue epistemology. Are you familiar with that term?
I can figure out what it means.
It's a new term to me. I thought I was going to make up my own term for it, and I was going to call it epistemically contingent. I mean, your ability to discover certain features of reality is contingent on your state of consciousness or your scientific acumen. So virtue epistemology, they'll say, like, in order to acquire knowledge, you need good listening skills, and so many virtues you need to have and implement in order to acquire knowledge. And on the spiritual platform, it would be things like you need to be free from lust, envy, greed. There's so many materialistic emotions that can cloud our consciousness and inhibit our ability to perceive reality accurately. And research in psychology on the matter of cognitive dissonance can indicate things like this are valid. Like the principle is true. The question is, does it apply to spiritual subject matter? And you couldn't rule it out. So they find, like the original cognitive dissonance experiment where they had subjects do a really boring task for 20 minutes, and they had to go out into the waiting room and tell someone in the waiting room that the activity was really fun, even though it wasn't. And one group of participants got paid $1, and another group got paid $20. This was 20, 30 years ago or something, when it was a bit more money than it is now. The group that got paid $20 could justify lying to themselves, but the group that only got paid $1 couldn't. So they didn't want to believe that they did something for no good reason. So they actually believed that the activity was fun. So the group that only got paid $1, there's a dissonance. I'm a person who does things for good reasons. I just did something for no good reason. Those two things are incompatible. Therefore, I must have done it for a good reason. And they only got paid $1. So getting paid money to lie can't be a good enough reason. It wasn't enough money. So it must be that they didn't lie, and what they said is true. I mean, obviously that's a nation of what's going on in their head, but it matches the picture. So you get things like that, like, people in say a marriage, and one of the partners is abusive, but it's like, I'd say the wife fell in love with that person, has seen their good qualities for so many years, and figuring out your husband is abusive is not a palatable reality, and it contradicts what they already believe about that person. So they have this dilemma, and often for years they'll not acknowledge that they're in an abusive relationship until one day they do, and then there's a lot of damage done at that point. So in a similar way, we could be in an abusive relationship with our material desires or our the material energy, and just fail to acknowledge that there's another aspect to reality, and our worldview's been wrong, or we've got some bad qualities or something. So this could prohibit us from being able to see the spiritual reality. So, like, moral values are like this. You can't prove to somebody that murder is bad if they can't see it for themselves. If somebody thinks that, well, I can do what I want to do, it's like you can show them that there's consequences of their actions, but you can't prove to them that they shouldn't want those consequences, or they should care more, or even if even if there's no consequence, still it's the wrong thing to do. The only thing you can do is elevate the person's consciousness to the point where they can see that it's wrong, or that they don't want those consequences. They want better results, so they change their actions.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't necessarily want to stray into morality. I mean, you said at the beginning, like, you made a declaration of where you come from in terms of morality and faith, and I forgot that. So, I mean, I am an atheist, and from a moral point of view, I'm a secular humanist. I believe that it is possible to construct a morality that works based on secular humanist rules.
That would just come down to pragmatism. You can get good results.
So
you don't need to believe in God in order to be a decent human being and treat other people well and live in a society of other people that do the same thing.
Right. And I also, like, I'm not like a lot of atheists. I don't believe that there is sufficient proof yet to say that the world is better off not believing in God. I think there is some evidence that says that, yeah, but I mean, I know people of faith who are spectacularly good people. So, like, to use another thought experiment, I once thought, supposing, like, this is my own personal version of the problem of evil. Supposing I was a god and I had a button that could make the entire world stop believing me at the same time, would I push it? And my immediate answer was yes, because the world would be so much better not believing in me. But that was sort of, some time ago, and like
there's a lot of people who believe that still, though, which bugs me, because it's like, like I thought of one analogy for it. Like, if, like, say a car manufacturer produces a car that rolls really badly, do they just stop making cars because cars roll badly because that car rolled badly? Or do they figure out why it's rolling, change the center of gravity, and start producing a car that doesn't roll? In the same way with belief in God,
right.
If belief in God, if a particular theistic ideology is demonstrated to be dangerous, do you then conclude that all theistic ideologies are dangerous, or do you figure out what elements make it dangerous and then target those, and then leave the ones that aren't dangerous in place?
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on that, because after I thought that, I later came up with, like, supposing it was possible for me to push that button, but before I pushed it, I would make certain exceptions. And there is at least one person I know whose life has been fabulous, and she has made fantastic contributions to the world in general. I can't say that it's necessarily because of a faith, but I'm pretty sure that it had a big part to play in it. So if I could make an exception for Sally, then and make everybody else stop believing in me, then maybe I would do that. If you see what I mean. So then you say, okay, well, so that there are definitely exceptions.
I mean, one thought I had on the exceptions thing is, like, you can't say that theism is dangerous if there's one person who isn't harmed by theism, but that on its own is not good logic, because you know, that would be like saying that cigarettes aren't carcinogenic if there's one person who smoked cigarettes their whole life and didn't get cancer, which is obviously
Yeah.
fallacious
Yeah.
reasoning. What you actually have to do is look at, data and, multivariate analysis, rule out the variables and see if there's correlations between theism and, bad results, violence and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
when they've done those studies, there's, obviously the odd study will show that religion harmful, but the preponderance of the evidence shows that religion is actually beneficial. People that are religious are healthier, live longer, they get divorced less, they're less violent, they spend less time in jail.
I don't know. We're reading completely different papers because I've seen papers that say the opposite. Like
I can send you a whole bibliography full that I got from Inspiring Philosophy.
Okay. There's one famous one which is quoted by a lot of atheists as kind of like absolute proof that religion is bad, and I don't agree that it is absolute proof that religion is bad, but it is. Let's just say it's interesting, and that is like a comparison of the prison, the rate of crime in places like Scandinavia, where
so that's country studies, is it?
Yes. So you compare
that. So I mean, if you compare an entire country to a whole other country, they call that population studies, and basically scientists use those in order to get leads. So if they find a correlation based on a population study, then they'll do targeted research in order to figure out if there's actually something to it. But a population study on its own is really weak evidence.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. But yeah, I mean, if I can sort of do a physics. What I wanted to say, because I'm not really sure if I understood the point you were trying to make about teleological phenomenology or the teleological phenomenology. Okay, but you seem to be saying that we have to have okay, I don't know if are you trying to say that we have to be good people in order to understand the universe? Because that is definitely not true.
There's like, you could say, a hierarchy of knowledge. So there's layers of knowledge that you can acquire
in the physics world
while being a drunkard.
Right.
Example. But then there's
right. But I mean, some of the greatest physicists of all time have been absolute bastards. And
you don't find
real
a great
heroes
who was a bastard. I mean, of course, you could call it a victory by definition. Because I would define a saintly person as somebody who's not a bastard.
Okay, Newton comes to mind. I love Newton. He is possibly my greatest scientific hero. He revolutionized so many different fields in an incredibly short period of time.
There's still certain qualities
most people have
in his character that if they weren't there, he wouldn't have that knowledge, like diligence and listening skills.
I don't think he had listening skills.
Like whatever they are, there's certain qualities that are required. Like paying attention. That like whatever exactly they are. I haven't really studied it enough to in order to be able to list what they would be. But the knowledge that Einstein and Newton and all these people uncovered isn't what we would call, from a spiritual point of view, confidential knowledge. It's like Bhagavad Gita, there's a chapter called Confidential Knowledge. The reason it's confidential is because not many people know it. And like the ancient Greeks and so many other societies, they had this idea of basically what we call now virtue epistemology, that your state of consciousness mattered for your ability to acquire knowledge. And so to acquire knowledge about the material world doesn't require that you have any high morality and high character and so on, because material world. But to acquire knowledge about God and the spiritual world requires that you live a good life. So like every religion in the world, you'll find teaching that it's like really important that you don't unnecessarily cause suffering to other living entities.
I'm going to have to stop soon.
Right.
We can talk again if you like.
Yeah. I'm enjoying this. I've been looking for someone to have this discussion with. Like, I try to have it with atheists in the comment section about like, because I mean, where I go with the argument, I'll just quickly flesh out the argument I like to make. So basically, you can have self-evident proof, or you can have pragmatism. Pragmatism is all you've got left over when you accept epistemic solipsism. Epistemic solipsism is not the same thing as solipsism proper. It's just the idea that I can't know for sure if the material world is real or if the people in it are real, but they seem to be real, and I'm going to go with it. So these people do not end up in mental institutions. People with solipsism are likely to, because they sort of just assume the world's real. But they have this sort of like philosophical doubt about it being real. So when you have that philosophical doubt, then all you've got is pragmatism, that when I behave as if people are real, when I behave as if the material world is real, when I don't eat ice cream for dinner and eat actually healthy food, then I have a better life. And when...
Right.
Okay. So there's certain, like when I treat people nicely, they treat me nicely and I have a good life. So I don't know if any of this stuff is true, but I'm detecting a pattern here and I'm getting results that I like and I'm going to go with it. So in a similar way, we can see with religion that religion done well improves your quality of life.
Okay. I put up my third slide. So I think I take issue with, like you said, it was just pragmatism. I don't know if just was the word that you used, or
yeah. I mean, that's all you've got left over if you don't have self-evident truth. If you don't have a foundation of knowledge,
right,
all you've got is something that's internally consistent, and internally consistent just means like you're being practical. You're going for good results and avoiding bad results, but you really don't know if any of it's true.
But I mean that's you are underselling it by so much. Like, it's not just pragmatism. It's not like, whatever. Okay, so this is something that I've been thinking about for quite a long time. One of the following three features. So feature one is it's relative. We know that it is probably true, but we might not be certain. Feature two is that it's conditional in the sense that the veracity of that particular piece of knowledge depends on the veracity of something else, in the same way that I was saying, like the veracity of Einstein's field equations and the position of Mercury depends on the existence of the universe. And number three is it's tentative. It's the best explanation today, but tomorrow maybe somebody comes up with a better explanation. But none of those three features means that it is not knowledge. It's still knowledge. And these fields of knowledge are huge. There are so many papers on physics and mathematics that are still true, even if the universe does not exist.
Wow.
It's still
I can
knowledge.
still find an assumption in any type of knowledge that you could claim. Oh, are you there? Broken up a little bit. Hear me? I could. I mean,
Sorry.
any type of
I can
knowledge
hear
you
you.
can give me that you could say, even if the universe doesn't exist, this is still knowledge. I can find an assumption in there which cannot be proven, and if that assumption's false, then it's not true. Like the law of non-contradiction is a critical
Right.
piece of that's used in science in order to acquire knowledge. And if the law of non-contradiction is
Okay.
false, then I mean, obviously, it would be stupid to claim that it's not false. But the only way we know that the laws of logic are true is through a self-evident perception of their truth.
Right. So, what I'm saying is, like, you have all of this fantastic piece of work. Einstein's 6 years coming up with general relativity. Schwarzschild's brilliant paper giving the solution in a spherically symmetric gravitational field, and all of that leading up to the prediction of the precession of the perihelion of Mercury. All of the work of astronomers put in to measure all of that. You cannot disprove that. All you can do is say, if the universe doesn't exist, then
knowledge of the illusion.
Then Mercury doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then the knowledge is knowledge of an illusion. But that
I think that's just a sophisticated example of getting a practical result. So this mathematical theorem that we came up. Sorry,
it's not just a practical result. It's not just a practical result. It is a beautiful piece of knowledge.
Okay, it's a beautiful practical result, but the practical result is that we have this mathematical theorem, and when we punch in the numbers, it matches the orbit of Mercury. That's the result.
Yeah, I mean, not just Mercury. Mercury is just one example. It explains gravity throughout most of the universe.
Doesn't explain gravity and on a deeper level. All it does is, I mean, in one sense you can say explain gravity, but there's no explanation for gravity. Gravity is just taken as a fundamental layer of reality. It hasn't been proven. It's an interesting example of where science and theism have something in common, because science says we've discovered gravity and we've proven it. It's like, yeah, but give me proof for how gravity works. Why does gravity work? What makes it happen? And
it doesn't answer the why question.
I just thought I'd
that's true.
That because it is relevant.
Yeah.
I mean, so like, say you get these numbers, like these beautiful mathematical equations, you punch them in, and it describes things that we observe in reality. In a similar way, you get this theological knowledge coming from the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, and it's beautiful knowledge. The Sanskrit's like some of the most beautiful, like, linguistic stuff you can find anywhere on the planet, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam. Also, the Bhagavad Gita is very poetic, so it's beautiful, similar to how the mathematical equations are. But also, when you apply the knowledge, many people apply it and they see beautiful results in their life. They chant Hare Krishna, they live a more balanced mode of goodness life, avoid causing suffering to other living entities, and try to make their life meaningful by doing service and improving other people's lives and sharing this knowledge with other people. And the result that's promised, that they get detached from the material world, they get satisfied at heart, and they perceive the spiritual reality. Those three things happen. They perceive this beauty, they become detached from the material world, and they experience a kind of bliss. So I would argue that that's a parallel to what you just described with math and the cosmos.
Right.
Like spiritual knowledge deals with the inner world, our consciousness, the content of our consciousness. Mathematics and all the sort of stuff deals with things you can numerate, the noumenal world. So you wouldn't expect spiritual knowledge to, they're different, the fields, so that the evidence you're going to get for one thing being true is going to be different from another thing.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, okay. I'm not here to attack religion or spirituality. As far as I'm concerned, the important thing is that people are good, and like there's this phrase that some atheists use in a derogatory sense. They call people cherry pickers. I like cherry pickers because most religious texts are full of turds, and there are.
You won't find one in Srimad Bhagavatam, I promise you.
There is.
The Srimad Bhagavatam is spotless.
But there are a lot of people who are very happy to pick up a religious text and pick out all of the turds, and I would rather have cherry pickers and turd pickers.
I like. I mean, like I think it's really important to detail the aspects that make religion dangerous, and to me, one of them is people just turn off their intelligence. Like, I really like the self-evident epistemology because it solves the epistemic regress problem. But not only that, is it solves the if your guru tells you to jump off a bridge, are you going to jump off a bridge problem? Because it's like you have your heart and you're listening to your heart. And if somebody tells you something and your heart's screaming at you saying, this is wrong, don't follow it, then you listen because this is what the epistemology tells you. And I think if everybody did that, the world would be a lot better. But people have this ideology that's like, no, you can't ignore what the priest is telling you or what the so-called scripture is telling you because that makes you a bad XYZ, adherent to, you profess your faith to whatever religion it might be. And it could happen with any religion. I don't want to pick on any one of them. You could do it with Krishna consciousness too. But, when you give that up and you stop listening to your heart and your intuition, then that's when you get drinking the Kool-Aid stuff happening.
Okay. So to wind this up, have I at least started to give you a satisfactory answer to the question that you wanted to ask Aaron Ra?
You've given me a more robust response than I've seen from anyone else. But for any of the answers you can give, I mean, I look at it this way. There's either a skeptical epistemology is so skeptical that it's devastating for all forms of rational thinking, including science, particularly humanism, and so on. Or...
Sorry, I missed that last sentence. Could you repeat it?
I think either an epistemology... Okay, we'll just wrap this up. I think either an epistemology is so skeptical that it's devastating to all forms of rational thinking because you can't even assume that the laws of logic are valid or that the real world exists and so on. Without that, you can't do science. So skepticism that is that devastating doesn't allow any kind of rational thinking. And if you apply it consistently, you'll be a brain in the vat. But people that have those extremely skeptical epistemologies do not apply them consistently. And so I'm always asking them, but what happens if you apply the same skepticism to your own epistemology? And then on the other side is if the epistemology that can justify any set of knowledge can also justify religion. So if you can justify that the material world might not be real, but believing it's real is beneficial, then I can show you that pretending, behaving as if religion is true can also be beneficial if done well. It can be done poorly and you get bad results too, obviously. But you can do that with science. You can blow yourself up with science, right?
Right. Yes.
So with the few you gave, I really appreciate that you've thought about this and you've actually put forward some kind of answer, but I gave a few examples of how I can use those same epistemologies to justify religion.
Right. And as I said, I'm not really interested in trying to disabuse you of that justification. So I would say, we could
I
get
imagine you're
on
not convinced yourself that
to
religion
some of this.
can be rational. Like if someone, suppose you had a
Um,
spiritual experience and you saw for yourself, like when you wake up from a dream, you immediately experience that your waking life is
Yeah.
more real than your dream. Suppose you had a spiritual experience like that. If you had the experience, it'd be a different story, but it's hypothetically it's possible.
Okay.
You have a spiritual experience and you realize,
Yeah,
my consciousness of God is more real than my material consciousness.
Yeah, I've had spiritual experiences, and I now believe that they have they have naturalistic explanations.
Relay.
I
mean, it's one thing to have a plausible explanation of how the brain could produce it. So if you want to say the brain produced it, then you could say the brain
sufficient.
Sorry, cut out again. Your internet's not great. Or I think it's your. If you want to say the brain produced it, then you could say the brain produced any experience you have, because you're just like when someone has a spiritual experience, you can correspond that to a brain state. When I drink water, you can correspond my sensation of drinking water to a brain state. Does that mean my brain produced the experience of drinking water?
I don't want to go into details. It's
maybe we can get into this next time.
No, this is something. It's too deeply personal to get into. But I actually, as a kid, I performed a miracle. What was to me a miracle, and I no longer believe it to have been a miracle. I just think it was a massive coincidence. So yeah. And since then, I've experienced massive coincidences that could not possibly have been miracles. So, I mean, there's a hackneyed saying that the most unbelievable universe would be the one in which coincidences didn't happen. But yeah, one final thought. Like most people who study physics, the worst thing would be if the questions stopped. If we actually had all of the answers and there was nothing left to question, then life would be very boring.
Well, not necessarily. Life can be interesting on an interpersonal level of, understanding the relationships of dynamics, and you can have continuous mystery of personal interactions folding.
Yeah, but I'm talking about like this. A lot of people seem to be really upset by the answer, by the idea that there might be something that they don't know the answer to.
Even in theism, we can never, the Vedas describe that God is continuously expanding. So even if you understood everything about God in one moment, a moment later he would have expanded, and there'll still be more for you to understand. So in Krishna consciousness, we have a concept that things are always expanding. So there's always an increase in bliss and rasa and knowledge and so on. So you don't have to worry about that, given Krishna consciousness being true.
Okay. I mean, that's, I think, an area where we can agree, and probably a great place to stop.
I really enjoyed this, and we'll have to find time to do another one. And if you could please send me your slides, I want to look over them, and eventually I want to condense this subject down to a short 10-minute video. And I don't want to straw man your arguments at all. I want to put them on the best possible foot. So I'm glad I've got you, because I can run the video past you until you're satisfied that I've represented your arguments properly.
Okay.
Right,
cool.
Cool.